ma'am.
All right.
And how your budget's looking?
All right. I'm Betty Adams Green, and I am the judge of the Juvenile Court of Metropolitan Nashville-Davidson County. To my left is Tim Agent, who is court administrator over programs for the Juvenile Court. Mr. Jim Swack, who is court administrator for our personnel, budget issues, procurement, those kinds of issues. And Mr. Charles Ward, who is our chief probation officer and resident historian at the Juvenile Court.
Many years of distinguished and quality service from...
I think we have probably over 200 years of experience if you add up all of our time. So don't go dividing that right now. We have had actually a very good year, Mayor. We're happy to be back in our building and be back home.
Yeah.
That's working well. We have, one of the things that I'm the proudest of is the emphasis that we have put on our probation services over the past year. In the past, we have always supervised young people, but I don't think we have ever gone about it quite as systematically and methodically as we're doing now. Recently, we did a sweep of young people that were on probation. We took 50 school resource officers, 26 probation officers, checked on 134 young people, and found a 95% compliance rate with those. And that is consistent with what we're finding throughout the year. We have done, over the past year, our probation officers have done 21,600 curfew checks and spot checks on their probationers to be sure that they were following the rules of probation. Probation really doesn't mean anything if you don't check on it and enforce it. We've done 21,600 face-to-face contacts. We've done 2,600 curfew checks and a number of room searches, and of those we are running between 85 and 95% compliance by the children that are on probation. So we feel like that emphasis is paying off in the court. One of the ways that we have noticed it paying off is we are down numbers-wise in a couple of categories. Our transfer hearings are down drastically. We're very proud of that. We're also proud to say that there has been a 200% decrease in the homicides that have been charged to juveniles. Now, granted, that represents 4 actual cases, but it's still 200%. No. So we want to brag on that a little bit. The MSAC program continues to do a tremendous job with the young people that are not going to school as they should and are lingering, loitering on the street. We had 900 referrals this year. Of that 900, our staff was able to identify 200 who needed additional services other than just the educational and school-related services. We were able to work with them and to link them with 23 other community agencies and programs to assist them in getting them back on track. It ranged everything from stable housing to counseling to tutoring for them, and I think that has really caused us to be proactive on the issue of truancy, and overall has been a great benefit to those young people. We hope in the coming year to be able to merge our traditional truancy work at the juvenile court with the work of MSAC. That would allow us to expand what MSAC is able to do by being in some other areas, by targeting some schools or some areas where truancy among children is a particular problem. Mm-hmm. We know that. It would allow us to add 4 full-time and 3 part-time truancy folks to work under the direction of MSAC. Now, obviously, this is contingent on the budget, but that's what we would like to do at this point.
How's there in the old East Precinct, how's that working out, the building-wise?
It's working out quite well. Now, we were a little crowded during the flood year, and I think we were all glad. I think they were extremely glad to see us move out. Let me just put it like that. But now I think it's working quite well.
They did have some recent plumbing issues, I think, but I believe they've resolved those. So.
It's an old building. It's going to have issues, but it's working well. Our parentage division had has placed in the last several years in the top 3 in the state in the collection of child support on behalf of children in foster care. I'm proud of it for this year, but I want you to know that's not an oddity. We have done that for several years running. We are continuing to see, and I mentioned this last year, an increase in the demand for interpreter services. That is something that we are looking for grants. We're doing everything we can to bring in funding for that, but we are really kind of pushing the limits on our resources for those issues. We over the past year have had 1,050 requests for interpreters, and we've had 1,200 matters that have required us to bring in an interpreter, and those interpreters represent 28 different languages as well as sign. So we're just a little UN out there, but so far we're able to accommodate that. Our caseloads for our probation officers have been holding steady. We run approximately 550 young people on probation at any one time, and that represents a caseload of about 22 individuals. We also devote 2 probation officers to our drug court. I think I mentioned last year, but I want to brag on it again, that because of the increased focus we've put on probation, Mr. Ward and his group have worked to come up with some guidelines for our probation officers. They are required to have 65 personal, face-to-face contacts with the children on their probation loads each month. And we do check that and we do monitor that, and I think that in and of itself is something that's making a tremendous difference in the length of time that children stay on probation. They get there, they get their counseling done, they get their public service work done, we get the resources in place that they need, and then we get out of their lives. And I think that's a good thing. The average lifespan of a supervised probation case is anywhere from 3 to 12 months. Several years ago, they were all averaging right at 12 months, which puts a real strain on your probation officer. So I think this is a far better system.
Good.
We continue to work out of community offices as opposed to working out of the juvenile court. The children are in the community, so we're in the community too. Many of those are in our housing developments. We appreciate their cooperation. We're in community centers. And then some other not-for-profits have allowed us to have offices there, along with East Precinct. We've been there for some period of time. The major issue of concern for me is the same major issue of concern I have expressed for the last several years. We have a grant from the State Department of Children's Services under which we employ 12 of our 26 probation officers based on that grant. Right now, for this year, that grant is $434,333. We are in the same situation right now we were in last year. We have had no word from the state of Tennessee on that grant. If we lose that grant, that in and of itself is going to cause the court to have to go back to doing 2 things: judicial decisions and probation supervision. That will be the only thing we would be able to do. We would have to pull in every other resource we have to do those 2 things. I am somewhat optimistic that that money will come again this year, but I have talked with the commissioner. She has indicated she would like to see us get it, but that certainly in and of itself is not a guarantee that money is going to be forthcoming, and that is almost half of our supervisory probation caseload at the court. That continues to be a huge issue for us.
You should know soon.
Well, I would hope so, but last year it was near the end of May before we found out. So if we were to have that, and then also have a reduction through Metro, would just simply put us to hearing cases and putting the worst offenders on some form of probation. That would be about all we could do. It would obviously have a large degree of negative impact on what we do. We have talked about, well, what if we did this and what if we did that, and quite frankly, there's just no way to compensate for that kind of a reduction. For our reduction, you had asked that we look at a budget that would represent, I believe, 2% in reductions. And to that end, we would recommend, we do have at this time 3 unfilled positions. We would leave those unfilled. That is something that we don't need to do. One of those positions is at MSAC, one is in our intake division, which last year was able to successfully divert right at 1,100 cases from the court. So clearly we would like to get that position filled so we could continue to operate some diversion programs.
How long have those positions been unfilled?
2 have been unfilled since the fall, 1 late fall, November, I believe. And then the one that's been vacant the longest has been vacant since, I believe, August.
Okay.
And we have held those in anticipation of worst case scenario kinds of issues. The only improvement that's reflected in our budget is that standard cost of living, the escalator clause in our detention contract. I believe the actual dollar amount, the $140,000, is slightly more than the escalator clause. We are required under the contract to maintain the facility, and for instance, not long ago we had to replace a $9,000 dryer, washer, commercial washer. And those are the kinds of things we're responsible for doing. So that's the difference in this $140,000 and the actual dollar amount of the escalator clause. And having said that, I'll be happy to address questions.
You've mentioned in your strategic issues some issues regarding interpreters.
Mm-hmm.
How's that going? You have apparently 28 different languages or dialects.
We are straining to keep up with that, to be perfectly honest with you. We are straining from an administration standpoint just to get the people there on the day they're needed for the minimum amount of time. You pay by the hour. So clearly we want to do as good a job of planning for that as we can. But it is stretching us to the absolute limit right now.
And what's the census in the detention area? Is that?
The detention census runs, we had a low, I believe, at one point last month of 23 in detention. We have had as high as 50. Basically, the average is probably more like 30, 28 to 30. It's a very low census for a community of this size. And I think part of that is because we've gone to a program of graduated sanctions with our probationers. If there is a violation, we don't automatically bring them in. We try to do some kind of a graduated sanction that can be done in the community setting that's appropriate to the offense committed.
Good. And the building's working well second time around?
Second time around, we're doing well.
Good, good. Rich? Pretty straightforward. Great. All right, well, thank you for all you're doing.